Small towns have a certain charm, like the front of a postcard. Church steeples, family names everyone knows, bake sales, and Friday night football games. And of course, a rumor mill, often disguised as the church phone tree or the PTA. But scratch the surface and you'll find something deeper, and it isn't always pretty or pastoral. Small towns can breed generations of family power, toxic ideas recycled in a shallow pool with a sketchy cleaning schedule, grudges older than town charters, and lives so interconnected that they can twist the fabric of the community itself. Flora, Indiana is one of those towns, and this isn't a story about its charm. It's a story about one of Flora's darkest nights. The night of fire ripped through a 2-story house on Columbia Street and claimed the lives of 4 sisters, Keyana, Keyara, Kerriele, and Kionnie. But this fire didn't just take 4 little girls. It burned away the picture-perfect surface of Flora and exposed what lay underneath: the politics, the prejudice, the propaganda. And in the nearly decade since the fire, the outcry for justice has only grown louder. An outcry from family and friends rippled through the community and into online forums, YouTube videos, and social media campaigns. Digital rallies sprang up as online sleuths tried to do what many felt the officials were failing to do. But as those voices refusing to fade grew louder, so did the rumors, conspiracies, and speculation. Stories that began in grief with a genuine hunger for accountability twisted into titillating gossip, flimsy evidence, and wild interpretations. And in that haze, the truth risks being buried. The truth that 4 little girls were murdered and they still need justice. Wild theories without basis in facts, evidence, or science won't solve this case. But careful focus on the victims and an honest evaluation of the information we do have just might. To do that, we have to put down our enchantment with scandal. We have to ask painful questions. We have to critique weak theories, and we have to accept that we don't have all the answers or even all of the information. This is the case of the Flora 4, a horrific, fatal fire in Flora, Indiana, ruled in arson, and the infuriatingly slow fight for justice that has followed. We're peeling back every wild theory, every allegation, every accusation, and boiling it down to the evidence, the science, and the statements that we do have to cut through the noise and bring you the story of the unsolved murder of 4 little girls. Because this case is solvable. So let's get into it right now on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark, sooty landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer and former firefighter, and today I'll be playing the role of firebreak between fact and Facebook theories gone wild.
And I'm the little canary in your existential coal mine.
Before we get into today's case, we need you like a small town pool needs chlorine. Help us get a bigger audience pool for hygiene. You can do that by telling your friends about us, leaving us a 5-star review, talking about us on social media, sharing our content when you see us, giving us likes, dropping comments, the more unhinged the better, and of course actually watching the whole ding-dang thing when we post content. Double speed's fine if you gotta. Our audience is growing, but I have a list of court records to pay for longer than my arm, and to do that we need our growth to multiply like Tupperware lids in the back of a neglected cupboard. Please and thank you. You can find us on X, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. If you want to super support our growth, go put on a shirt. Not just any shirt, one that screams you have perfect taste in podcasts. The merch link is in our show notes. And if you're ready to make a spiritual commitment to Crime to Burn, we're literally days away from launching the Cult of Steve Patreon. I'd love to give you an exact date, but honestly, I'm hanging on by a fingernail over here this week. What I can promise is we'll have 3 tiers, from bargain basement to financially unhinged, so you can binge episodes ad-free and decide just how much extra chaos you want to introduce into your life. Follow us on social media, and you'll know the minute it goes live. And as always, email us your personal fire stories, case suggestions, feedback, and tales of Tupperware terror at crimetoburn@gmail.com. Before we get started, I want to talk about our mission in covering this case. This one came in as a listener request, and honestly, it's been on my radar for a long time, but I was hesitant to cover it. Not for the reasons you might think. I hesitated because this case has a cult following. A huge web of online sleuths has been picking apart every detail, broadcasting theories, naming suspects, and spreading allegations, and I don't doubt the intentions behind it. The outcry is absolutely justified. This case is nearly a decade old, and just last month, July of 2025, the FBI picked it up and started going door to door in Flora, because they, like everyone online, knows that this case is solvable. But here's the problem. Not everything out there is useful or even helpful. I listened to a lot of coverage on this case, and I say this with as much empathy and respect as possible, but there is a lot of garbage out there, a lot. And to be fair, some of that content was made years ago before we knew everything that we know now. But the more titillating rumors, once they take root, spread fast. And when those rumors come from creators with large audiences, they can become dangerous distractions. Some theories are based on flimsy evidence or wild interpretations or just plain misunderstanding of fire science. Sometimes it's innocent speculation, people trying to help without the expertise to interpret what they're seeing. And that's why I was hesitant to wade into this fray. I don't want to criticize people who are genuinely trying to shine a light into a dark corner. But then I realized that's exactly what I have to do, because the truth matters here. I don't believe anyone is deliberately misleading. I think some theories just spread because they're more intriguing than others, but this case is already intriguing enough. And yes, it's frustrating. It's frustrating that this case has gone unsolved for so long. It's frustrating that public records have been withheld. It's frustrating that the investigation is still ongoing, which means there are limits to what we can access. But the bottom line is this: I believe this case is solvable. So I'm going to do the possibly unpopular thing. I'm going to start cutting through the untangled web of rumor and conspiracy. I'm going to tell you what holds weight and what doesn't. Because if we don't cut away the crap, it risks obscuring the truth. And I can't stand by and let 4 little girls be denied justice just because I wanted to avoid any backlash. My job is to tell the truth, to scrutinize, and to be objective, and I will not trade my integrity for sensationalism. So, if what I present doesn't line up with your interpretation of the story, all I ask is that you listen with an open mind. Now there's a lot to untangle, so let's go back to November of 2016. Galen Rose, a single mom of 4 girls, had only moved to Flora that spring. She'd gotten a job at the local Marathon gas station and enrolled her girls in the local public school. They moved into a rental house at the corner of Columbia and Division. It was an old balloon frame house built in the early 1900s. Originally built as a single-family home, it had been renovated into a duplex. Galen's unit covered the entire first floor with access to the basement for laundry, and a staircase that led to one upstairs bedroom. That's where all 4 girls slept. Galen's bedroom was downstairs. The rest of the second floor, along with the third, was a separate unit accessed by an outdoor stairway and rented by another family. Now I bring up the construction of this house for a reason. Balloon frame houses are a notorious fire hazard. In this style, the wall studs run continuously from the basement all the way to the roof with no fire breaks. That means every wall cavity acts like a chimney, giving the fire and smoke a straight shot to the upper floors. By contrast, modern platform framing includes breaks at each floor level. This slows fire spread. But in balloon frame houses, especially older ones which may not have insulation, there's nothing to stop flames or smoke from racing upstairs. When I was in the fire department, this was one of the fire hazards we were trained to identify, because once the fire gets into those walls, it moves fast, and the upper floors can become toxic and unsurvivable in a matter of minutes. But understandably, construction types weren't on Galen Rose's mind when she was looking for a place to raise her 4 girls, Keyana, Keyara, Kerriele, and Kionnie. She was looking for something affordable, something close to work, something that felt safe, a place where her young family could thrive. Life isn't easy for single moms, and money is always tight. In interviews, Galen hasn't given many reasons for why she left Jefferson City, her former home, but she did, and Flora was a whole new world. With a population of just over 2,000 people, Flora was compact, interwoven, and deeply personal. The kind of small town where everyone knows everyone, and where the roots run deep, but so did prejudice. Back in the 1920s and 30s, Flora was a hotbed of Klan activity, and even by 2016, only about 0.2% of the town's population was Black. Galen described moments of racial tension after her move to Flora. One of them came while she was working at the gas station. An older man would just toss loose change at her to pay for his coffee, not because he didn't have the bills, but because he didn't approve of a new family whose complexion didn't pass his honky bucket color test. But Galen wasn't in Flora to please the populace. She had 4 daughters to raise. Her oldest, Keyana Davis, was 11, Keyara Phillips was 9, Kerriele McDonald was 7, and Kionnie Welch was just 5 years old. Galen's days were packed, working shifts at the gas station, caring for her girls, and keeping up with their busy schedules. The girls were cheerleaders, and the weekend of the fire, they had just returned from a cheer competition out of town. One of the girls also played basketball. And every sports mom knows the struggle of juggling even one child's schedule. Now multiply that by 4 and do it as a single mom. So pleasing a town that was judging people on a Pantone scale wasn't on her checklist. Sunday night, November 20th, 2016, Galen put her 4 girls to bed and retired to her own room and soon fell asleep. Hours later, she would awaken into a real-life nightmare, one that still isn't over, nearly a decade later. Galen doesn't know what woke her up. She said it was just a feeling, like something pulled her from sleep. When she got up, the realization hit with horror. The house was full of smoke. She ran from her room toward the stairs. The smoke clawed at her throat. Her eyes were burning. She pushed a few steps up before the heat and choking air forced her back. She called out to her daughters through the smoke, and she says she heard them call back. She tried again to get to them, but the fire was already too much. Desperate, she stumbled outside screaming for help. The first person to hear Galen's screams was Elizabeth Ayers, a next-door neighbor. She said she'd been awake since about 2:45 a.m., unable to fall back asleep when she heard Galen shouting. Elizabeth and her husband Adam rushed outside and found Galen covered in soot, screaming that her children were trapped inside. Adam ran to help. He crawled into the burning home and later told investigators he saw flames on the dining room floor and the top of a table. Heat and smoke were so intense that he was forced back out. Meanwhile, at 3:28 a.m., Elizabeth used her cell phone, and this is where things take a turn. You'd assume her first call might have been to 911, but it wasn't. Elizabeth Ayers called her husband's cousin, Josh Ayers, one of the owners of the home that Galen was renting, to tell him that his house was on fire. 6 minutes later, dispatch finally received the first call from Elizabeth reporting the fire. 6 wasted minutes, with children trapped upstairs, with her own husband crawling through a burning house, with another couple asleep in the upstairs unit. 6 minutes in a fire can be the difference between a desperate rescue and an obituary. I know people do strange things in the shock of an emergency, but if you're clear-headed enough to call a family member with a financial stake in the property, how are you not clear-headed enough to dial 911 first? I doubt I'm the only one struggling with that. And we're going to talk more about the Ayers family before we're done. Now, while this was unfolding, in the upstairs unit that abutted the girls' room, Courtney Dons and her fiancé Anthony Gray were asleep in the living room. They were awakened by the shriek of their smoke detector. Thankfully, their children who lived with them were not home that night. Courtney later told police that the smoke filled their unit so fast, she wasn't sure if they would have successfully been able to escape if they had fallen asleep in their bedroom instead of on the couch. The air seared their eyes and burned their throats, and they barely made it to the exterior door and outside stairwell. Outside, Courtney called 911 from her cell phone. Her call hit dispatch just 21 seconds after Elizabeth Ayers' belated call finally came through. 40 seconds later, the first tones went out over dispatch, alerting police and fire. Meanwhile, Adam Ayers ran back to his house looking for a flashlight and a blanket. I presume the blanket was meant to shield him from the radiant heat of the superheated gases collecting near the ceilings. That's my best guess. But he couldn't find a flashlight, so he rushed back with only a blanket and tried again and was forced out once more. Why might he need a flashlight? Well, the house's layout was a bit confusing. When you entered Galen's apartment, the front door led straight into the living room. Her bedroom was immediately to the left. Further in, an archway opened into a dining room, and behind the left side of that archway were the stairs, making a sharp left turn halfway up at a landing and then turning into the girls' bedroom. It was directly above Galen's. If you went past the dining room, you would make another left turn into the kitchen and then a right to the back door into the mudroom and basement stairs. There was also an exterior door off of the mudroom. Why does this matter? because some of the rescuers knew the stairs were to the left, but they were turning too early into Galen's downstairs bedroom instead of pushing through the dining room and then left into the stairwell. That mistake ended up costing precious time. During this time, Galen herself tried to get back inside, but she couldn't. She was covered in soot, badly burned and choking from the smoke inhalation. As Adam Ayers stumbled back out of the house for the second time, the first patrol car arrived. Officer Josh Dislinger pulled up just 2 minutes and 1 second after dispatch received Elizabeth Ayers' 911 call, only 1 minute after the tones had gone out. Just 15 seconds later, Deputy Yoder arrived with his dashcam rolling and microphone on. And this is where we start busting myths about the fire. To be fair, some of the videos that got this wrong were released back around 2020, and I don't know for certain when the dashcam footage itself was made public. But here's the claim I saw in multiple videos. When the calls came in, Dislinger was closer than Yoder, but Yoder arrived first. And to online sleuths, this quote-unquote proved that Dislinger may have deliberately dragged his feet to get there. But this claim is wrong. The timeline and the dashcam prove it. Dislinger and Yoder put everything on the line that night to try to get to those kids. Not only were they police officers, but they were also volunteer firefighters, because in small towns, that's often how it works. Dislinger's first act, he gets on the radio to tell dispatch to start mutual aid immediately. He doesn't wait for the fire department to request it. He knows that every second matters when kids are trapped. Then he goes in. He reports that inside the front door at this point, there was only about 12 to 18 inches of clean air below the smoke layer. And let's be clear here, Hollywood has twisted our sense of what a fire looks like. This isn't backdraft. You're not walking around upright with no mask through rolling flames with perfect visibility.
That's because you're not Kurt Russell.
It's thick, black, oily smoke. You can't see your hand in front of your face, and that smoke, it's not just a nuisance, it's superheated gas, and it's radiating that heat in all directions, including downward. That clear space near the floor exists only because that is where the fire is sucking in oxygen, pulling the cooler air low. But crawl up into that smoke layer, and it's like climbing into an oven. The heat radiates down, cooking you from above. So when Dislinger went in, crawling under the smoke, he was being shouted at from all sides. Galen was yelling, Adam Ayers was yelling, neighbors collecting outside were shouting directions. Everyone's telling him to go left. So he did, but too soon. He crawled into Galen's bedroom. Chaos, noise, zero visibility, but he realizes he's in a bedroom. And that's where you normally find people during a fire that broke out in the middle of the night. So he began searching the bedroom for as long as he could, which wasn't very long. He tried until the conditions forced him back out. And as Dislinger came back out from his first search, Yoder pulled up, and the two of them went back in together, ending up again in Galen's bedroom. But now the superheated gas layer was even lower and hotter, and it was unbearable. They had to retreat. Once outside, they made the call to break out the front windows to vent some of the heat and smoke. Dislinger puked as he tried to catch his breath before going back in, and still, the fire department hadn't yet arrived. It had only been minutes. But this brings us to bad fire analysis claim number 2. Some people have claimed that breaking out those windows was an intentional act to feed the fire with oxygen so the girls couldn't be rescued. Y'all, bless your conspiracy theory-filled hearts, but let's be clear. Ventilation of a fire is complicated, yes. Opening more windows can introduce more oxygen and make the fire grow, that's true. But as the smoke and gas layer gets hotter and hotter, you get closer to flashover, the moment that the entire smoke layer ignites into one deadly fireball. Now, you do have to be careful. If victims are between the fire and the ventilation path, opening up that pathway can pull the fire toward them. But in this case, the victims were upstairs. The whole house was already filled with superheated gas. The clean air layer was only 18 inches off the floor when Dislinger first went in, meaning it was even lower now. These guys were volunteer firefighters, and they recognized that flashover was likely imminent. Breaking those windows was their best chance to vent heat, delay flashover, and maybe, just maybe, buy a few more seconds to get to those kids. And yes, even within the fire service, ventilation is still hotly debated. Some argue it's better not to ventilate at all without a hose line in place. Others argue you have to vent in order to delay flashover, and many say it's just case by case and situation by situation. But here's what matters. Dislinger and Yoder weren't sitting around on the front porch debating fire science. They were trying to get in a house without turnout gear, burning themselves trying to save kids with no engine on scene, no water supply, and yet their thought process was probably, if we can buy just a few more seconds before flashover, maybe we can reach them. Guys, that's not sabotage, that's desperation. So there they are, breaking windows, puking, trying to keep themselves alive, with no idea that years later, internet true crime buffs would accuse them of being absolute barbarians for it. Galen tells them the stairs are to the left, and suddenly it clicks for Disslinger. He remembers seeing outside steps to the upstairs unit. He does not realize this is a duplex, so he bolts toward the exterior stairs. But Courtney Dons, the upstairs neighbor, intercepts him, explains the setup, and sends him back to the front door. This time, he and Yoder, still reeling from smoke and praying that venting those windows bought them a few more seconds, push deeper inside. They make it to the dining room, but they cannot get up the stairs before the heat and smoke drive them back out again. They can't stay inside for more than a few seconds at a time. So Disslinger tells Yoder, go get the engine. The firehouse is literally right down the street. Yoder, already suffering from smoke inhalation and burns, jumps in his patrol car and makes it to the firehouse in 26 seconds. That's how close it was. Now on his dash cam, you can hear him yelling to people in the bay, get moving, there's kids trapped. And then he runs into the bay and grabs turnout gear. It's off camera, but that's what it sounds like he's doing. He suits up and jumps back into his cruiser. Less than 30 seconds later, he's back at the fire scene, but now with an engine hot on his tail. And here we go with another bad fire analysis. Because believe me, this case has no shortage of them. Some people have latched onto Yoder's dashcam audio where he's yelling at the firehouse crew to get moving and spun it into a claim that firefighters were just standing around inside with their thumbs up their asses. Y'all, this ain't Chicago. This is a rural town of 2,000 people with a volunteer fire department. Volunteer departments are usually not staffed around the clock. Overnight, nobody's sitting around waiting for a bell to ring. These are people with entire lives and day jobs outside of fire calls. You've got a pager on your nightstand, and when it goes off, you roll out of bed, jump in your car, and drive legally or legally-ish at breakneck speeds to the firehouse, throw on your gear, and get on the rig. I started my own career at a home response department. My firehouse was a 10-minute drive from my home, and every single call started with me legally-ish barreling down back roads seconds after being jolted awake by my pager. Now here's the kicker. Yoder pulled up in front of the Flora fire station just 4 minutes after dispatch got the first 911 call. 4 minutes. That's not a crew dragging their feet. That's a crew that was dragging on pants while possibly breaking traffic laws to get there. Some bigger departments do keep a duty crew sleeping at the station, but Flora, not likely. I even called the current fire chief to ask. He hasn't called me back yet. So I checked their ISO rating. It's a 6. Now for context, ISO rates departments on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the big city gold standard, full staffing, great water supply throughout the jurisdiction, reliable rigs. A 6 tells me Flora is probably exactly what I suspect, a small, under-resourced, and almost certainly home response volunteer outfit. Look, there's plenty in this case that earns a very hard side-eye, but Yoder and Disslinger and the volunteer firefighters, they're not where the stink is coming from. Yoder comes tearing back onto the scene, suited up, engine right behind him. Officially, both hit the house at 3:40 a.m. That is just 6 minutes after dispatch got the first call. But 12 minutes after Elizabeth Ayers thought the landlord should know before the people with hoses. So if you're looking for a place to rest that suspicious eyebrow, there's a candidate. Now while Yoder was gone, Chief Randall arrives, at least according to the narrative timeline compiled by an independent fire investigator named Todd Hetrick. Hetrick was brought in after the fire, hired by the landlord's attorney for a civil case that we're going to be digging into later. But because he was hired through the legal process, he had access to dispatch logs and video as part of discovery. That gave him the ability to build a detailed timeline, and that matters. Because if you've dug into this case, you know getting any official documents out of the county has been like trying to squeeze blood out of a stone. This report does exist, but it wasn't easy to track down. So while Yoder is racing for the engine, Disslinger and Randall are stuck on the porch praying that he comes back fast with a rig on his bumper. Thanks to those much-maligned ventilation efforts, the smoke layer has now lifted all the way up to about chest height. It's not pretty, but it's much more survivable for a crawl. So they push inside, hoping the clearer conditions will finally get them to the stairs. But the trade-off for cleaner air is that the fire is larger and hotter now. They make it as far as the dining room before the flames themselves, not just the superheated gas layer, drive them back out the door again. That detail comes straight from post-fire interviews with Chief Randall and Officer Disslinger, which the independent fire investigator had access to through Discovery. And here comes more bad fire scene interpretation. The claim this time? That Yoder and Disslinger, both cops and volunteer firefighters, had no business grabbing SCBA bottles off the engine and going back in, as if the fire crew was just sitting in the rig waiting for their nails to dry. Here's the reality. Every rig on scene has a specific job, and the first engine, their job is always to establish the water supply. It's the first truck that does search and rescue. Trucks don't carry attack lines, engines do. So that first engine isn't diving into the house. They're laying hose and getting water ready, because without that, any crew that goes inside could end up trapped with nothing to back them up. That's why Yoder and Disslinger went back in. They weren't on the engine crew. They weren't tasked with establishing the water supply. They weren't willing to wait on a truck that wasn't there yet. They filled the gap and took the search and rescue role. Now, was it risky to do that without water established? Sure, we can argue tactics all day, but kids were trapped. Galen was screaming. Neighbors were standing frozen in horror on the lawn. Do you really blame them for taking the risk instead of waiting on the porch with the rest of the crowd? But this is where things do go sideways for our brave duo. They push back inside, but the smoke layer is pressing down again and fast. The house is choking itself. They fight their way through to the stairs and make it 4 or 5 steps up, but the rapidly dropping superheated gases are an impenetrable wall. The smoke layer drops down to 6 or 8 inches off the floor. That's belly crawl territory. That's death territory. The house is seconds away from flashing over, that transition point where everything ignites at once. Hollywood likes to dramatize it with slow motion and fireballs, but in real life, it's quick, it's dirty, and it's deadly. Disslinger turns back, trying to get out, when suddenly, Yoder's mic picks up him screaming, and then silence. At the door, Disslinger realizes Yoder is not with him. The radio calls go out, officer down, officer down. And here's the thing. In a movie, this is where the swelling strings would cue the hero moment. In reality, your skin feels like it's in a convection oven, your lungs are burning, and every primal instinct in your body is screaming to get out. But Disslinger does the dumbest, bravest thing he could do. He goes back into a house seconds from flashover with no hose line to back him up. Inside, he finds Yoder unconscious. Yoder's mask had been knocked off his face and he was sucking down that poison air. And with zero backup, Disslinger drags him out of the inferno. He pulls Yoder out of the house just before it flashes over. Yoder had been willing to give his life to reach those kids, and I'll be blunt. The claims that he was somehow complicit, they're so insulting it makes my blood pressure rise. I have to literally stop, take deep breaths, and remind myself that most people have never been faced with a room seconds from flashover. Those men were heroes, full stop. I will not entertain statements to the contrary. I said what I said. And yes, we'll talk about what went wrong in this fire and in the investigation, but this is not where the rot is. At 3:46 a.m., 12 minutes after the first 911 call, the engine crew finally was putting water on the fire. That was after 6 precious minutes had been wasted calling the landlord instead of dispatch. 8 minutes later, 3 of the children were pulled from the building and CPR began. 2 minutes after that, the 4th child was recovered and resuscitation efforts started. Meanwhile, Galen Rose, suffering from smoke inhalation, burns, and shock, had to be sedated, intubated, and was airlifted to Eskenazi Hospital's burn unit in Indianapolis.
For my own information, Why was she intubated?
She had burns to her throat. Your airway swells when you're exposed to super hot gases like that, and it can cut off your ability to breathe. So people that have been in a fire like that, they will sedate them and intubate them to maintain the airway until they can get to the hospital and assess how bad it is and how much swelling there is. And then they'll take them out of the medically induced coma and wean them off a ventilator. She'd even sustained burns to her eyes from repeated attempts to fight her way back into the fire and reach her children. Officer Josh Disslinger was transported by ambulance to the local hospital for smoke inhalation and released the next day. But Deputy Drew Yoder was airlifted to St. Joseph's Hospital's burn unit in Fort Wayne with smoke inhalation and thermal injuries to his head, his airway, and his hands. The 4 sisters did not survive. Less than 30 minutes after Galen first woke up, her entire family had been destroyed by fire. And for the first responders on the scene, men like Drew Yoder and Josh Dislinger, the scars are permanent. Some are visible like burns, but others are invisible, carried in their minds, the memory of the night that they couldn't save 4 little girls. And this is just the beginning. We've barely scratched the surface. Because for the investigators, the fire was just the start of the story. Once the flames were out, the real work begins, figuring out why it started. And in Flora, that search for answers has been painfully slow, too slow. Even today in 2025, the case drags on in secrecy, raising more questions than answers. But someone knows the truth. It was widely reported that an accelerant detection canine was brought in after the fire and didn't alert. Still, evidence was collected and sent for lab analysis. But the first missteps may have happened long before ignition. Nothing poisons an investigation faster than conflicts of interest. And here we've got some eyebrow-raising ones. To unpack that, we need to talk about Chief Adam Randall, the fire chief who tried to enter the home alongside Officer Dislinger while Yoder was off fetching the fire engine. See, Adam Randall's family tree is something. His father, Dennis Randall, had already served 2 terms as county sheriff before taking a job as an investigator with the Indiana State Fire Marshal, a job he still held in 2016. So we've got Dennis, the fire investigator, and his son Adam, the fire chief, both tied to this fire investigation. And honestly, you can't swing a dead cat at a Randall reunion without hitting a badge or a helmet. Charles Randall, Dennis's grandfather, was Delphi's police chief back in the 1930s. Dennis's dad, a firefighter with the Delphi Tri-Township Volunteer Fire Department. Sprinkle in some other fire marshals, a few more cops, and even some jailers, and you've got a family that's deeply entrenched in Carroll County's law enforcement and fire service. Now, is it illegal for public service to run in families? No. But in a small town, when old families hold old ties to powerful positions, it can be enough to make you cock your head a little, especially when those ties don't stop at public service. Take the Randalls. Adam Randall, the fire chief. His father, Dennis Randall, the fire investigator. And then there's another branch of the Randall family, including Michael Randall, Dennis's nephew, Adam's cousin. And Michael is a convicted arsonist. I was able to confirm it. He went to prison for setting fire to his own grandparents' home. And those grandparents weren't just anybody. Like I said, his grandfather was a Delphi Tri-Township volunteer firefighter, and his grandmother a member of the fire department's Ladies Auxiliary, which makes that crime not only destructive, but personal. Now, is that directly connected to the Flora fire? We can't say with any confidence, but it's interesting, especially because there are whispers that Michael may have been suspected in other fires beyond the one he was convicted for, though I have not been able to independently verify those rumors. Coincidence? Maybe. But in a case already crawling with conflicts of interest, the optics here are, let's just say, less than reassuring. And if that's not enough to raise an eyebrow, the Randall-Ayers connection will. Remember, Elizabeth Ayers, the neighbor who called Josh Ayers before she ever dialed 911? Josh isn't just some random cousin. He's Adam Ayers' cousin, and his company, Birch Tree Holdings, owned the house that Galen and her girls were renting when it burned. Now, he wasn't the only owner, but we'll get to his partners a bit later. And Josh Ayers wasn't just a landlord either. He also happened to be the Flora Town Board president, which means Adam Randall, the fire chief, reported to him. He was Adam Randall's boss. On top of that, Josh owned a Maytag appliance business and the local True Value hardware store, and you can probably guess who supplied the appliances for Birch Tree rental homes. On its own, none of that is illegal. It's small town economics. One hand feeds the other. But here's where it starts to get dicey. The findings of this investigation had real consequences for Josh Ayers. If the cause of the fire exposed safety failures tied to the property or code violations, that could ripple through his business, his reputation, potentially even his role in the town leadership. So when the fire chief reports to him, and the fire investigator is the chief's father, it sure starts to look like one family has the power to tug on every single lever of this case. And given Dennis Randall's former position as the county sheriff, it stands to reason he likely still had strong relationships with the people inside the sheriff's office. And that means Ayers may have not just had direct ties to the fire investigation through the Randalls, but possibly indirect influence through Dennis's law enforcement connections. Now that's speculation, but it's speculation that doesn't require much of a leap. And that's the thing about small towns and politics. They don't exactly specialize in diversification. When power gets concentrated in the hands of a very small circle with the same last names and possibly the same overlapping interests, it stops looking like community service and starts looking like a potential recipe for corruption. But it doesn't have to be. A little transparency can go a very long way. Unfortunately, transparency is about as common in Flora as a keg at a church potluck. Take this. When Chief Adam Randall sat down with police for questioning, his lawyer wasn't paid for by him or the department. Nope, it was Josh Ayers, our town council president / appliance salesman / landlord, who dipped into the town funds to foot the bill. Why? Who knows? But one thing's clear. If you're looking for transparency in Flora, bring a flashlight. But the sketchy history isn't just on Dennis Randall's side of things. His wife's record raises eyebrows too. Dennis, the former sheriff turned fire investigator, is married to Jean Ann Randall, mother of Fire Chief Adam Randall. And in 2014, just 2 years before the Flora fire, Jean was convicted of embezzling more than $325,000 from the Delphi law firm where she worked. She was sentenced in October of that year. Now, during that investigation, Dennis himself was also scrutinized, but he was ultimately cleared of wrongdoing. Though one might wonder how he didn't notice that the household was living a little beyond what a sheriff and law firm bookkeeper's salaries might reasonably allow. But the state trooper who gathered evidence against Jean and interrogated Dennis was Trooper Greg Edwards. And in a twist straight out of a small-town drama, just 2 years later, Edwards and Dennis found themselves working side by side on the Flora fire investigation. Now, is it proven that their prior history soured collaboration on this critical case? No. But the potential for tension, mistrust, or flat-out animosity is hard to ignore. And in an investigation already accused of being murky and mishandled, that possibility is worth pointing out. So before we even start digging into the evidence, what do we have? A father-son duo running command and fire investigation, both tied to the sheriff's office, while the landlord of the burned house just so happens to hold sway over the very people doing the investigating. Sounds legit, right? Totally normal. Absolutely unbiased. Nothing to see here, except this pool is way too shallow to swim in without bumping into a Randall or an Ayers. And that context matters because we're about to see just how ugly small-town politics can get. This case didn't just expose fault lines in the community, it ended careers, including both Dennis and Adam Randall's. So let's review that family tree for a second. A former sheriff turned state fire investigator, father of the fire chief, husband of a convicted embezzler, son of a firefighter, grandson of a sheriff, uncle of a convicted arsonist. Honestly, those family reunions must be wilder than the Real Housewives reunion specials. We could pitch this to Bravo, call it Real Housefires of Carroll County. So now we've got the context. And here's the thing, in a case like this, even the actions that seem reasonable start to look different once you see the currents running underneath. The undertow is strong, and we're trying to keep the truth from being swept downstream. Some of the first missteps in the investigation trace back to Dennis Randall. You'd think a former sheriff might be more careful with his words, but he had a lot on his plate, so maybe we cut him some slack. But soon after the fire, he told the press that the cause of the fire was undetermined. Now, technically, that's true. It was too early to rule out arson, electrical, or other accidental causes, so the only accurate answer at that stage was undetermined. But here's the problem. He left out one critical word. Yet. The cause hadn't been determined yet. Instead, the public heard, "Story's over, investigation's done, don't expect any answers." And for a community desperate for clarity, that single word could have made all the difference. It turned the spotlight and the heat right on to the investigation itself. And sure enough, the backlash came fast and ugly. Accusations that investigators didn't care because the victims were black in a town with a history steeped in Klan activity. And let's be real, old prejudices don't just disappear. They go underground, and they resurface at moments like this. Now, I've heard rumors about Dennis Randall, the kind of comments you'd expect from someone who's never seen the inside of a diversity training classroom, let alone passed one. But here's the problem. I can't verify those stories, so I'm not going to repeat them as fact. But rumor mills are powerful, and they don't have to be true to be potentially corrosive. They just have to be loud. And in Flora, they were deafening. In the very earliest days, investigators weren't leaning toward arson at all. Their accelerant dog hadn't alerted. The first focus was on the kitchen, specifically the appliances. When kids die in a fire, the hunt for accidental causes starts with the obvious suspects. Stoves left on, faulty refrigerators, wiring gone bad. And sure enough, Flora's investigation zeroed in on Galen's kitchen appliances. For weeks, that was the working theory. And it was a reasonable starting point. You see, Josh Ayers, landlord of the property and local appliance dealer, wasn't exactly stocking his rentals with top-shelf gear. The stove reportedly had malfunctioning burners. Also, some of the outlets in the kitchen had only just been fixed in the weeks before the fire. Early press coverage even echoed that theory, pointing to a possible point of origin in the kitchen behind the stove or refrigerator. But finding the point of origin in a fire like this is far from an exact science. And when investigators tested the stove and fridge, they came up empty. Nothing pointed to an accidental cause. And then, surprise, just kidding, turns out it was arson. That's actually what happened. Months after Dennis Randall left the press shrugging because he forgot the word yet in his first statement, he dropped a press release. The fire had been determined to be arson. Now remember, the accelerant dog didn't alert at the scene, but the lab results told a very different story. According to Dennis's press release, accelerant was found in multiple rooms, basically all over the place. A detail that inconveniently would later prove to be wrong. But at the time, the message came across less like science and more like, see, we're not racist, we're just slow. And just like that, the deaths of 4 little girls weren't just a tragedy anymore, they were a murder investigation. Which brings us to the next conspiracy theory. And unlike some of the others, this one isn't totally outlandish, but it's been blown way out of context, and spoiler alert, it's been disproven now. Here's why. Carroll County isn't just home to Flora, it also includes a little place you might have heard of in the true crime world. Delphi. Yes, that Delphi. The place where Abby and Libby were murdered. And that case hit the news cycle just months after Dennis dropped the arson murder bombshell in Flora. The press absolutely clamored over the Delphi murders, wall-to-wall coverage. And Flora, the 4 black girls who died in the fire, slipped right below the fold, barely a whisper. So people asked questions. Was this about race? 6 little girls dead in Carroll County within months. 2 white, 4 black. Only the white ones got the headlines. You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to see why people thought something was rotten here. And the rumor mills, they were churning, and they were asking questions, fair ones to be honest, but the threads holding this particular theory together were weaker than overcooked spaghetti. Some folks speculated that the 2 cases were linked. 6 girls dead in the same county over just a few months? On its face, maybe not an outlandish question, but here's the rub. Setting a house on fire with kids inside versus abducting 2 girls in broad daylight and murdering them in the woods, those are wildly different MOs. So how did this theory really catch fire? Well, it all comes back to the infamous video of the bridge guy, the single most generic-looking man in America. For those unfamiliar with the Delphi murders, Abby and Libby were on a trail and realized a man was following them, so they grabbed their phone and filmed him. When their bodies were later found, investigators recovered the video. There's a blurry shot of a middle-aged, overweight white guy in a blue jacket. Suddenly, people were freeze-framing the few news scraps from the Flora press coverage and swearing they spotted the same man, the same jacket, the same vibe. But it turns out more than one dude in Indiana owns a blue jacket. Shocking, I know. The truth, at least half of the middle-aged, slightly overweight white men could probably pass for bridge guy if you squinted hard enough. It's like playing Where's Waldo, except Waldo is every guy waiting on his mozzarella sticks at an Applebee's bar. In the Delphi case, that was a slow burn too, unsolved for way too long. But it finally coughed up a conviction very recently. But for years, the speculation machine was still grinding. Even so, linking it to the Flora fire was always weak sauce. My humble opinion, it never held water, even back then. But there are some legitimate and valid complaints, and none louder than the disparity in rewards. For Abby and Libby's killers, a staggering $325,000 was on the table. For the Flora 4, just $5,000.
What?
That gap doesn't whisper, it screams, and what it screams is ugly. It tells families and the whole world that some lives are worth fighting harder for than others. And whether or not that was the intent, that's the message people heard loud and clear.
I don't like that message.
I don't either.
It's not true.
So community members rallied to raise funds to boost the reward in the Flora 4 case. But the effort turned into a mess. They pulled together something close to $20,000, but controversy quickly erupted over where the money was actually going. The original agreement had said that if the reward wasn't claimed within 5 years, the balance would be donated to the Flora Volunteer Fire Department. But in the wake of the investigation fiasco, and with social media hammering the fire department as corrupt or complicit, the idea of funneling reward money back to them didn't exactly sit well. After that, things get murky. Some reports suggest that the money was refunded or partially refunded, and others say that it sat in limbo. Whether any of it was ever donated or it simply disappeared is unclear. What we can say with certainty is that the official reward remains, to this day, at just $5,000. Meanwhile, the Flora case investigation was a mess. You've got Dennis Randall rolling out his big press release declaring the fire was arson and getting it factually wrong. He said accelerant was splashed all over the house in multiple rooms. Insurance investigators immediately pushed back because that wasn't true. Later, civil trial records finally clarified what should have been clear from the start. Accelerant was detected in a single location near the back door. And then there's the other ugly truth of fire deaths. When children die, public suspicion almost always tilts toward the mother. Galen Rose was badly burned, half-blinded, and admitted to a burn unit as a result of trying to rescue her kids. And still, rumors swirl that she set the fire herself. Instead of shutting that down, investigators let it fester. For weeks, there was no official word to the public that she was not a suspect. Maybe they thought it went without saying, but it didn't. The silence was deafening. And in a town with Flora's racial history, it only fueled suspicion that bias, conscious or not, was steering this investigation. By June of 2017, just 7 months after the fire, Dennis Randall abruptly resigned. His son Adam, the fire chief, stepped down not long after, and they were not the only ones. Carroll County prosecutor Robert Ives also retired. Officially, none of these exits were connected. Unofficially, the timing was impossible to ignore. It was obvious why Dennis left. His bungled press release and wobbly handling of the case left the entire investigation looking compromised. And Adam's departure may have been tied to personal or mental health reasons, though that's only speculation. And then there was Robert Ives. When the press asked him about the arson findings from Dennis Randall's press release, Ives could have leaned into a safe stock line like, "I can't comment on evidence in an ongoing investigation." Instead, he blurted out to the press that he hadn't even seen the report. That one sentence made it sound like the county's top prosecutor was out of the loop on one of the biggest cases in his career. Not exactly a confidence booster. Shortly after, he resigned too. Taking his place was Nick McLeland, a former public defender. And some corners of the internet cried foul, claiming that it was improper to appoint a former defender to the prosecutor's office. But here's the truth. Moving from defense to prosecution is a completely normal career path. It happens all the time. If there's something sketchy about his appointment, it's not that detail. And speaking of sketchy people, next week, we're going to start digging into the potential persons of interest, the names that keep surfacing in whispers, reports, and rumors. Some of them may surprise you, and that's coming up in part 2 of the Flora 4, Between Rumors and Reality on Crime to Burn.
You're staring at me.
But after we record, I'm going to go take a shower, wash my hair.
I wanted to watch until you started saying that. Take your dirty hat and get out of here. He's double jointed. You're sensitive about it. Don't mention it.
I like your elbows.
It sounds like chloroform.
I'm so whistly. Maybe I need like a tongue muffler. Somebody call the sound engineer. Something's weird. Gotta stay opinionated.
What?
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 I don't know. I'm asking you when you want me to stop.
Stop. Please stop. I love everything. If we were in Australia, we'd have bigger cans.
Maybe I should move to Australia. Get some bigger cans. You said you liked my cans just the way they were.
My breath is baited.
Jugs, melons, knockers, headlights, rack.
I mean, it's at least closer to a cone. Pauly Shore was more correct, right?
Yeah.
Bananas. I just imagine myself helicoptering 2 banana boobs.
Well, that's an image that I'm not going to get out of my brain.
Me neither.
Maybe I can wipe the bananas out of your brain.
Just infinitely spinning bananas.
You almost always burp right there as soon as I finish that.
That's a skill.
You're so skilled. But
Say honky bucket. That sounds nice. That's going to be an interesting statement. Is this to draw contrast between the honky bucket?
Dislinger was actually closer than Yoder to the fire, but Yoder arrived first.
So we got like a lightsaber duel between Dick Slinger and Yoda.
Yeah. It's thick, black, oily smoke. You can't see your hand in front of your face.
You have me at thick and black. Apparently it's in the brains of Italians. You don't listen.
Mm-mm.
Italian brain rot, though, that's real. Because I'm not real sure what it is, but I know it is.
It's like an enigma. Oh.
It's like an enema.
No, enigma.
Enema?
Enigma.
I don't think you're allowed to say that word. This is one of those union-mandated things. I don't know. In your world, strings are attached to levers. It's a strange mechanical phenomenon. What's the point in having a lever? It's like hand-shaped. We're putting strings on them. Daddy, would you like some sausage? Just because you have some strings doesn't mean you get to tug on levers. Does me saying, does it sound funny to you not? Does that sound funny to you?
What? That's too many. I can't follow that.
Can you get mozzarella sticks from the Applebee's bar?
I think so.
I thought they just served drinks. I could smuggle in a penguin. What are you, some kind of elitist?
Hot sauce.
You don't think you eat the Great Value brand? You do. So fetch me a beer and I'll give you a legal disclaimer.
Thanks for looking out for my butt, man.
I'm always looking at your butt. I love the box.
No, don't.
But I love the box. With my hotness, I will defrost that freezer. Legally speaking, we don't call it a cult. We call it a community-driven, Steve-centric lifestyle collective. Which, yes, costs money to trademark, and, by the way, money we don't have. So, sure, let's keep adding more sacred nonsense to the invoice. This is damaging my mind. No, don't help me. I gotta do this on my own. I can do it. I can take another step. Do you have any idea how much it costs to file a sandwich-based tax exemption? I do. Too much. And look, I'm not saying don't join the Patreon. Join it. Please, for the love of Steve, join it. But right now our operating costs are higher than a ritual bonfire in downtown Los Angeles, and apparently we're paying licensing fees on Gregorian chants. Gregorian chants! Nobody even owns those. But yeah, somehow we got a bill.
I think we're being scammed.
Until then, I'll be in my office filling out yet another certificate of Holy Sandwich authenticity, which is a real form. I wish I wasn't kidding. Congratulations, everyone. We're officially a brand extension of a cult. Great for the bottom line. Terrible for my ulcers. I don't even have ulcers. By continuing to listen, you hereby acknowledge, affirm, and eternally consecrate your auditory faculties to the cult of Steve. All sandwiches, whether ham, turkey, or otherwise, remain the sole intellectual property of Steve. Joining our Patreon constitutes tacit agreement to become slightly more Steve than you were yesterday. Patreon membership may cause elevated enlightenment, sudden craving for sacred sandwiches, or loss of personal identity as Steveness increases. Void where prohibited, especially in Ohio. Membership does not guarantee salvation, only better access to the outtakes. In the matter of Steve versus reality, the Honorable Court finds in favor of Steve. I run this cheese outfit.
Cheese outfit sounds delicious.
It's cheddar. Well, if it was American, it would have like plastic on it or something. Too sterile. I don't like the prophylactic cheese. You better double bag that cheese.
I like a little sprinkle of Monterey Jack now and then.
I'm a huge Munster fan.
I like cheddar. I like Monterey Jack. I like mozzarella.
You're just a beige throw pillow.
Here's my twisted cheese confession. I don't like macaroni and cheese made from scratch. I like the box stuff. It tastes like nostalgia to me.
You know what? Some of our nostalgia tastes better than others, so I think that's fair. Some people's nostalgia tastes like 70s basement carpet.
I am hungry now because I did not eat breakfast before we recorded, so I wouldn't have the weird tummy noises.
Well, fortunately for you, I've got a whole pallet of 70s basement carpet.
It's definitely going to be leg day today. I'm an overthinker.
Well, you're not an overthinker, or you would have thought of that. Why is it so sticky? We should go now.
Okay. Crime to Burn is a production of Crime to Burn, LLC, where we light fires in your brain and not your buildings. All rights reserved. Still spiritually parched after this episode? It's okay, Steve believes in cross-pollination. Here's a trailer for a show we think deserves to infiltrate your ear holes, in a good way. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review before you go. Steve is watching.
Hello, twisted humans.
Do you find yourself wanting to know more about the latest murder, conspiracy, cult, or haunting?
Then this is the podcast for you. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sierra, and this is
Twisted and Uncorked.